What transforms a brilliant mind into humanity's greatest threat? Today, we dive into the psychology of Lex Luthor, a man whose intellect could have saved the world, but whose obsession turned him into its destroyer. How does genius become evil? What happens when human pride collides with divine power? The answer will challenge everything you think you know about heroes and villains. In Metropolis, a city gleaming with possibility, Alexander Joseph Luthor was born into privilege and expectation. From childhood, Lex displayed an intellect that bordered on supernatural, solving complex equations at age 6, building advanced technology as a teenager, and graduating from MIT before most people finish high school. But here's where psychology reveals its first dark truth. Exceptional intelligence often comes with exceptional isolation. Lex grew up surrounded by people who couldn't match his mental capacity. He saw patterns others missed, solved problems others couldn't even comprehend. This cognitive gap created what psychologists call intellectual loneliness, a profound sense of being fundamentally different from everyone around you. Young Lex learned early that his mind was his greatest asset and his heaviest burden. He watched his father, Lionel Luthor, use intelligence as a weapon in business, viewing people as chess pieces to be manipulated. The boy absorbed this lesson. Intelligence equals power, and power means never being vulnerable again. In Smallville, teenage Lex first encountered Clark Kent, the farm boy who somehow matched his achievements without apparent effort. For the first time, Lex met someone who challenged his worldview that intelligence was the ultimate advantage. Clark's natural goodness and inexplicable abilities planted the first seeds of something dangerous in Lex's mind, doubt about his own supremacy. But there was something that nobody saw coming, the moment when friendship would become humanity's greatest curse. The breaking point came not through a single catastrophic event, but through 1,000 small cuts to Lex's ego. Every time Clark saved someone, every moment of the farm boy's moral clarity, every instance where natural goodness triumphed over calculated intelligence, these became psychological wounds that festered in Lex's brilliant mind. What many don't understand about narcissistic injury is how it functions in highly intelligent individuals. When someone like Lex experiences repeated challenges to their self-concept, their brain doesn't simply accept defeat. Instead, it constructs elaborate defense mechanisms. Lex began to rationalize Clark's success. There had to be a secret, a trick, something that made this impossible. The transformation accelerated when Lex discovered Clark's alien nature. Suddenly, every failure, every moment of feeling inferior, had an explanation that both relieved and enraged him. He wasn't losing to a better human. He was being deceived by a cosmic fraud. This revelation triggered what psychologists call paranoid restructuring. The mind reorganizes reality to protect the ego from unbearable truths. Lex's worldview shifted fundamentally. If Clark could fool everyone while being an alien, what other deceptions existed? If humanity's greatest hero was actually an extraterrestrial threat, then perhaps Lex's suspicions and superiority complex weren't flaws. They were necessary defenses for the human race. The final rupture came when Lex realized that despite all his intelligence, resources, and preparation, he could never truly compete with someone who possessed powers beyond human comprehension. This wasn't just personal failure. It was existential impossibility. How do you beat a god with mere mortal genius? And it was there that everything began to crumble, as Lex's brilliant mind turned its full power toward a single, consuming purpose. Lex's transformation wasn't random madness. It was methodical reconstruction of reality itself. His brilliant mind, once capable of solving humanity's greatest challenges, now focused entirely on a single problem: how to prove human supremacy over alien divinity. Watch how his thinking evolved. If Superman is truly benevolent, why doesn't he solve world hunger, end all wars, cure every disease? These weren't questions born from genuine concern for humanity. They were intellectual weapons designed to justify his obsession. Lex wasn't asking these questions to help people. He was asking them to prove that Superman's very existence was an insult to human potential. The psychology here is fascinating and terrifying. Lex developed what researchers call malignant rationalization, the ability to make destructive actions seem not just reasonable, but morally necessary. Every scheme against Superman became, in Lex's mind, a defense of human dignity. Every attempt to expose or defeat the Man of Steel was reframed as protecting Earth from alien colonization. His corporate empire, LexCorp, became a monument to this twisted logic. Every building, every invention, every business decision was measured against one metric. Did it bring him closer to proving human superiority? Lex could cure cancer, but chose instead to build weapons. He could solve energy crises, but preferred to focus on anti-Superman technology. His genius, which could have elevated all of humanity, became sharply focused on tearing down one individual. Most chillingly, Lex began to see himself as humanity's true savior, not despite his villainy, but because of it. In his restructured reality, Superman was the villain, and Lex was the hero willing to do whatever necessary to save his species. This isn't uncommon among highly intelligent antagonists. They don't see themselves as evil, but as the only one brave enough to do what must be done. But the real monster was still sleeping, waiting for the moment when intellectual justification would become moral certainty. The moment of total transgression came when Lex stopped seeing innocent casualties as unfortunate side effects and began viewing them as acceptable losses in his war for human dignity. This shift represents one of the most dangerous transformations in human psychology, when the ends begin to justify any means. It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. First, Lex rationalized endangering a few people to test Superman's response time. Then he accepted that some might be hurt in his schemes. After all, more would suffer if Superman's deception continued. Eventually, he reached the horrifying conclusion that humanity would be better served by his rule than Superman's protection, even if achieving that rule required temporary suffering. The psychological term for this is moral disengagement, the ability to deactivate ethical standards without seeing yourself as evil. Lex didn't wake up one day deciding to become a monster. Instead, he convinced himself that traditional morality was a luxury humanity couldn't afford while under alien influence. Consider his most chilling rationalization. Superman makes humanity weak by solving our problems for us. He's not saving us. He's making us dependent, helpless, inferior. Every person he rescues is someone who could have learned to save themselves. In Lex's restructured worldview, Superman's heroism became humanity's greatest weakness. This logic led to increasingly extreme actions. If Superman responded to disasters, Lex would create situations where the hero had to choose between multiple catastrophes. If Superman inspired hope, Lex would orchestrate events to breed despair and self-reliance. Each escalation was justified as necessary education for humanity. The most disturbing aspect? Lex's actions began to make sense within his framework. If you truly believed that humanity was being infantilized by an alien overlord, wouldn't extreme measures be justified? If you genuinely thought our species' future depended on rejecting divine intervention, wouldn't any sacrifice be worthwhile? Here lies the heart of Lex's evil. Not madness, but terrifyingly coherent reasoning built on fundamentally flawed premises. He created a logical system so complete, so self-justifying, that any action became defensible. But what if? What if some of his concerns weren't entirely wrong? Here's where Lex Luthor becomes truly terrifying. Much of his analysis of Superman's impact on humanity has basis in real psychological and sociological research. Studies on learned helplessness show that when people believe they can't control outcomes, they stop trying entirely. Research on authority dependency demonstrates how populations can become overly reliant on powerful protectors, losing initiative and self-efficacy. Lex's core argument that Superman's intervention prevents human growth mirrors real debates in developmental psychology. When parents solve every problem for their children, those children often struggle with independence and resilience. When governments handle every crisis, citizens may lose the skills and motivation for self-governance. Is it possible that Superman's constant rescuing has similar effects on humanity? The genius of Lex's manipulation lies in how he weaponizes legitimate psychological principles. His public campaigns against Superman often highlight real human potential being unrealized. Why reach for the stars when a flying man brings them to us? He asks, why develop our strength when strength itself walks among us? These aren't random villain speeches. They're sophisticated appeals to human pride and potential. Even more disturbing is how Lex's methods mirror those of real-world leaders who've caused massive harm while believing in their righteousness. Like many historical figures who justified terrible actions through ideology, Lex has created a complete philosophical system that makes him the hero of his own story. Psychological research on grandiose narcissism reveals patterns that match Lex perfectly. Exceptional ability combined with deep insecurity, creating individuals who need constant validation of their superiority. When that validation is threatened, they don't adapt. They double down, becoming increasingly extreme in their efforts to prove their worth. The scariest part? Lex's intelligence makes him incredibly effective at recruiting others to his cause. He doesn't just rant about alien threats. He presents carefully crafted arguments, backed by data, appealing to humanity's deepest fears about autonomy and dignity. Some of history's most dangerous movements began with charismatic intellectuals who convinced others that extreme measures were not just justified, but morally required. This wasn't madness driving his actions. It was cold, calculated reasoning applied to fundamentally corrupted premises. What remains after Lex Luthor's war against Superman? A world forever changed by the collision between human ambition and cosmic power. His legacy isn't just the destruction he's caused, but the questions he's forced humanity to confront about their own nature and potential. In many DC storylines, Lex's influence extends far beyond his direct actions. He's created technologies that both threaten and protect, founded institutions that outlive their creator, and most importantly, planted ideas in human consciousness that can't be uprooted. The question, are we better off with or without Superman, didn't exist before Lex gave it voice. Consider the philosophical weight of his challenge. Is it better to live in a world where problems are solved by human effort, struggle, and occasional failure, or in a world where divine intervention prevents suffering but potentially stunts growth? There's no simple answer, and that's what makes Lex's arguments so persistently dangerous. His corporate empire continues to shape the world even when he's defeated or imprisoned. LexCorp's research into human enhancement, alien technology, and defensive systems reflects his core belief that humanity must evolve to face cosmic-level threats independently. Some of this research genuinely benefits mankind, while other projects serve his obsession with matching Superman's power. Perhaps most tragically, Lex represents the dark side of human exceptionalism, the idea that our species is so special that any challenge to our supremacy becomes an existential threat. His inability to accept that something might genuinely be better than human achievement reflects a psychological trap that could ensnare any sufficiently proud and intelligent individual. The real horror isn't that Lex Luthor exists, but that his arguments continue to resonate. In our own world, we see echoes of his reasoning whenever people reject help because it threatens their sense of independence, or when groups oppose progress because it challenges their position in established hierarchies. Lex forces us to ask uncomfortable questions. What if human pride is both our greatest strength and our fatal weakness? What happens when our desire for autonomy conflicts with our need for protection? How do we maintain our humanity while accepting that we might not be the most important beings in the universe? Who are we to judge someone fighting for human dignity, even through terrible means? And perhaps his war never truly ends, because the questions he raises are eternal parts of the human condition. Lex Luthor remains one of fiction's most terrifying villains, not because he's inhuman, but because he's the logical extreme of very human traits: intelligence, pride, and the desperate need to matter in a vast universe. His greatest evil isn't his schemes, it's how reasonable he makes them sound. In the end, maybe the real question isn't whether Lex is right or wrong, but whether any of us, given his gifts and circumstances, would choose differently.